From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse podcast. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, welcome back. Dr. Jason here at Dental Lighthouse podcast. And I am not going to subject you to another episode of musings or ramblings from myself, but I am really excited about my guest today, David Harris, CEO of Prosperident. You guys have definitely heard of Prosperident, the foremost, biggest dental forensic accounting, anti-embezzlement. I'm probably putting the wrong words here, but I'm really excited to have a conversation with David. We're going to unpack a lot of stuff today for the listeners that will ultimately make you better practice owners. So David, thank you so much for the time and thank you for being on the show.
Great to be with you, Jason. And I think your description was perfect. I wouldn't change a word.
Wow, that was great. All right. Every now and then I get something right. So David and I spent a few minutes before we hit record just kind of talking about, I mean, this is a big world, right? There's so many things that we can talk about and we could go down rabbit holes and what have you, but just in an effort to make sure that we're touching as many of our listeners as we can, I think what we've ultimately decided to do is talk about, a couple top three things, right? So in my world, I'm thinking, okay, what are the top three ways that you're experiencing your clients that have gone through embezzlement? Like, what are the top three most common ways that come across your desk? And then maybe we can kind of flip the script and say, okay, at a high level, what are the top three things that we can do to better protect ourselves? Does that sound like a conversation that you'd be open to having?
You bet.
Awesome. I'm excited. So without further ado, let's just start right off the bat. So let's say, what are the top three most common things that you're seeing or that you get phone calls for from your perspective and current clients in the world of embezzlement?
Well, the biggest thing, Jason, and by far the biggest, is people with issues with somebody stealing incoming funds. In other words, if I'm a thief, there are two ways I could do it. I could create some kind of expense for you that shouldn't really be there. I pad payroll, or maybe buy personal stuff for me and run it through the office somehow. Or I can steal incoming patient or insurance payments. And as you probably guessed, the insurance payments or patient payments are the dominant form of stealing. So that's what we see the most.
So let's just stop the tape right there. So that's a really good point, because in my world, very ignorant world, I'm thinking it's got to be about dollars. But to your point, it could be ordering things off Amazon. It could be just ordering things. They get to the office and then instead of getting put away in a closet, they get put in someone's purse or something along those lines. So I didn't even really think about that. So here I am already getting educated myself. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about that kind of theft, what about the gold jar? I mean, every dental practice has a gold jar where the old restorations go. And it's not all that carefully controlled generally. So, maybe staff steal your gold.
Yeah, that's another really good point. I was even thinking of like just the petty cash drawer, right? Like how good are we at keeping good records on petty cash and stuff like that? So, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Let's unpack that a little bit more.
All right. So stealing incoming revenue. The first thing I want to say is that there is no safe way to get paid. I hear a lot of doctors saying, well, if insurance companies pay me by electronic funds transfer, nobody can mess with that. Or, I don't want to take cash anymore because people will steal that and I'll move patients to other forms of payment. The first thing I want the listeners to understand is that any form of incoming funds can be intercepted. And as Jason and I discussed before we went live, I'm not going to get very specific here because I don't want to put information in the public domain that would hurt Jason's audience. So we won't talk details, but I will say it is not hard to cash checks with your name on them. It is easy for a staff member to intercept credit card payments, and electronic funds transfers can also be redirected. So there's no safe haven. your safety comes from doing a comparison between what patients paid and what went into your bank account. And that's the part where a lot of dental practices don't have good systems.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure I understand what you're saying, but for my own wherewithal and for the listeners, we just unpacked I'm assuming in your world the number one way that docs are embezzled, and then you started to scratch the surface on the flip side of that is um, how do we, what's the number one way to protect ourselves? So let's go to that side of the coin now. Well, when you say docs are just maybe asleep at the wheel, for lack of a better term. Can you unpack a few strategies that my listeners or just docs and business owners in general should be adopting to deal with what you're saying is the number one way that docs are getting embezzled?
Yeah, let's follow the decision tree of a thief.
Okay.
So, Jason, I'm your office manager, and I woke up this morning and I decided, all right, today's the day I'm going to steal from you. The first question I ask is really simple. You have practice management software in your office, and it records a lot of things, but one of the things it records is patient payments. And those patient payments recorded in your software should correspond to the amount of money that went into your bank. And there are two kinds of dentists. There are those who sit there at the end of the day and they print a report from their software and they compare it to the bank deposit. And then there's the other 85%.
Right.
And if you're in that 85%, and statistically you are, you are an enabler in the sense that you will allow the dumbest, laziest thief on the planet to take your money. If you're not comparing what your software said you collected with what went into the bank, then anybody at all can see money come in. They can record it as payments in your software, which keeps the amount of money that patients owe your practice accurate. And then they just don't deposit at all. And whether it's the doctor making the deposit or the staff, unless there's a referencing between what should be there and what is there, that's probably how stealing's going to happen.
And is your recommended system that somebody, ideally the doctor, based on the size of the entity, is doing this on a daily basis?
That was always the conventional wisdom. And when I started in this game 35 years ago, that was exactly what happened. What's changed in the intervening 35 years is that there are now a lot of transactions where there's a time offset. And what I mean by that is that they're captured on a different day in your software from when they hit your bank. Classic example is a credit card payment. So if a patient pays your practice by credit card today, that will be recorded in your practice management software as a payment today. But that money might not hit your bank for 2 days. So that balancing at the end of the day that you'd like to do is kind of complicated by these transactions that don't happen simultaneously in your bank and your software. The suggestion I'd make, Jason, is instead of trying to do that on a daily basis, let's do it on a monthly basis. So at the end of each month, let's compare collections from software against bank deposits. There's one extra step you have to do that I'll talk about in a minute. But a couple of advantages here. First of all, you do it once a month as opposed to maybe 15 or 18 times. And the second thing is that most timing differences when you widen the window self-resolve. In other words, if somebody pays by credit card on the 12th of the month and it gets deposited in your bank at the 14th of the month, when you're looking at the month as a whole, that's not a timing difference. Now all you're concerned with is the stuff that overhangs the first day of the month and the last day of the month, which is a much smaller number, relatively speaking, of transactions that kind of force you to dig deeper. So my suggestion would be do that monthly.
Okay.
And not daily, but do it.
For sure.
And if daily makes you happier, that's fine too. The one step though that I've never seen anybody but me talk about that is important in this is something I call articulation. And I know when I talk to a dentist or a dental audience about articulation, they're picturing jaw function, which is just fine. Um, my concept is similar, but it's a financial one. And what articulation means is this: if your practice was open 15 days last month, and in your left hand you've got 15 end of day reports from your software, and in your right hand you've got a month end report from your software. If we add up three important numbers, which are fees, adjustments, and payments from the 15-day end reports, they should be exactly the same as for the month end report. If they're not, what happened was somebody came in after hours and they did stuff they didn't want you to see. So that's the piece that ensures that your monthly information is accurate, or put another way, that there have been no transactions kind of slid by you by staff, and that everything that is on your monthly report is also on one of those daily reports that you checked at the end of each day. You got to do that. Especially when you move to monthly, you've got to do that.
So I really love what you just said here. A lot of wisdom in what you just unpacked. As my listeners know, I'm a systems guy, and I truly believe that we need to have systems in place that I always reference my 16-year-old son. I mean, I love the kid to death, but I mean, all he wants to do is bench press and chase women, right? So like, I just need to figure out things so he understands it, right? So how can we dummy down the system? So I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. The first thing that you are advising everyone to do is look at the dental software collection report at the end of the month, and then look at your bank reconciliation um, deposits at the end of the month and make sure they match. But the articulation side of this is, okay, look at your end of month number from your dental software and compare it to the 15, 16, 17, however many clinical days you're open, end of day sheets, and the deposit number for each of those sheets. So a little bit extra work, but we're going to add up those, let's call it 16 deposit amounts, and then make sure that that is also matching the dental software monthly deposit number. That's safe to say?
Yeah, I want to. Deposits are right. We also need to look at fees and adjustments.
Okay.
And really, what I'm trying to address, Jason, is people who want to hide something from you. If they know you look at your day end reports religiously,
Yes.
their response is, I'll come in on Saturday, I'll do some things that I don't want Jason to see, because they'll produce a Saturday day end and they'll shred it. And what the articulation calculation does is it makes sure that there's nothing that has happened in your software that isn't captured on one of those 15 or 17 day end reports that you've looked at the end of each day.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Okay, that nothing has been kind of slid by you, and that's important. So that articulation calculation, and if you want to make this simple, build a spreadsheet or email me and ask me for one, because I have a template of a spreadsheet for this. And all you have to do at the end of each day, it takes about a minute, is just enter those three numbers: fees, adjustments, payments. And then at the end of the month, you can look at the spreadsheet and compare the totals to the total on the monthly summary report. And those two should equal exactly. I mean, they should not be a single penny of difference. On the other hand, when you're comparing collections for the month versus deposits for the month, they're probably not going to add up perfectly. And it's because of those timing differences that we talked about before. So,
Yeah. So
let's talk about resolving those, because there's an easy way and a hard way to do it.
yeah, 100%. So I just want to make sure, like, before we do that, because I think that's the next layer of this onion that needs to get peeled. So you're saying, just in general terms, roughly what percentage of dentists, in your experience, are not even doing the end of month reconciliation?
From my experience, 85% of dentists have totally walked away from this problem.
Okay.
And
And then,
they either don't check day ends against bank deposits, or they don't do the monthly check, or they just kind of go home at the end of the day and hope for the best.
So only 15% of dentists are currently doing this. What percentage in your estimate are doing this additional level of checks and balances, this articulation process?
Um, Only ones who have heard this kind of conversation.
Right, right.
Because I have never ever seen any discussion of this in dental media or practice management textbooks or anything.
Okay.
And a lot of dentists focus on the day end as you need to. I mean, looking at your day end is important, but they just forget that there are more than 18 days in a month.
Yeah, so true. So true. Okay, love it.
So yeah, that's something that has to happen. And if you don't, again, you've left a door open that sooner or later a staff member is going to see and take advantage of. And your audience needs to hear this. 70% of them will get stolen from at some point in their careers. It might not be happening now. It might not happen next year, but sooner or later, 70% of dentists get stolen from.
Yeah, that's a big number. And I think it's human nature to just be like, well, that won't happen to me. But to your point about probability and the law of averages, 70% means you're more likely than not to be a victim.
Yeah. And again, it's not hard to lessen your risk. You just have to take a few basic steps. And, as I'm saying this, there's probably some percentage of your audience who say, wait a minute, this sounds like work. I went to dental school because I want to fix teeth, not because I want to deal with spreadsheets and numbers and stuff. And, I guess what I'll gently say to the audience is if that's what you want, that's fine. Just don't be a practice owner. There are plenty of other careers you can have in dentistry, but if you're listening to this and saying this isn't for me, that's your wake up call about the direction your career should go going forward.
Yeah. So what you just said
The
there
truth
is,
hurts sometimes.
yeah, what you just said there, my audience has heard me say before, and I wasn't intending to get on the soapbox, but I will. Um, you know, I think dentists just in general are so complacent because it is a profitable business and we do have a great income. And they just settle for mediocrity. And I get it, right? I've been there in my previous life. And what I try to communicate to them is, okay, if you're almost again falling asleep at the wheel or turning a blind eye to this, it is what it is. But just realize what they're doing like at the next level in terms of you're going to have to work X amount of years longer because money was stolen for you, or you will not be able to spend X amount of hours with your spouse, with your kids, because you're going to be at the chair because you were okay with letting this small amount, quote unquote, small amount of money just kind of fall through the cracks and turning a blind eye to it. So if you're not one that says I have to really get dialed in for myself, so be it. But think about how many more months or years you're going to have to work at the chair, or how many more hours you this is taking away from your spouse or your kids because you would like to be with them, but you can't be because you weren't choosing to be really refined in your business ownership systems.
Absolutely. And I'll put it a positive way. There are plenty of rewarding careers that people can have in dentistry where they can be pure clinical dentists. And if that's how you're wired, the best advice I can give anybody is just acknowledge that and work to your strengths.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
way of putting it.
we have a lot of people who call us and at some level, Jason, they're terrified of being practice owners because they just haven't either they don't have the capacity or they haven't made the commitment to say, okay, being a practice owner carries with it some burdens. And I have to not only acknowledge that, but embrace it.
So, in the perfect world, I started my first practice 25 years ago, and it was me and my wife. And then, you grow to like a team of like three or four people, and you're able, as the dentist, as the owner, as the founder, to kind of want to use the term micromanage, but you're able to kind of have your hands everywhere, right? What is your advice for, as DSOs are coming into the market, even someone like me that's still privately owned, 150 employees, a bunch of different locations. Obviously I'm not running to each location to print an end of day sheet and cross-reference it with the deposits in the bank. So how does your advice or your systems change as as offices get exponentially bigger in terms of locations or employees or what have you?
Well, let's start by saying that embezzlement is not a solo dentist problem only. We deal with everybody from one office dentists to some of the biggest DSOs in the country. And I can tell you categorically, they have the same problem. And a multi-practice setup offers some complications. And the first one you just mentioned, which is that, if you own 5 offices as a dentist, you have a lot of pulls on your time, and the chance that you're going to be able to do this personally is pretty small. So you have to put systems in place. And those systems typically involve somebody like a regional manager, or maybe there's a head office accounting group that do this. But the task is the same. They gather the information, they compare collections against deposits, which is the first job. The second question, which we kind of moved past, but let's circle back to, is if I'm stealing from you and you're effectively comparing collections against deposits, then what I need to do is I need to hack your software into lying about how much money patients pay. And that can happen in an individual practice, and it can also happen in a DSO. So, or a big multi-practice group. So when we think about individual offices, what I'm really saying is there needs to be oversight. And maybe it's a regional manager, or maybe, as I say, it's a centralized accounting group at head office. But they need to ask 2 questions. And the first question is, did the amount collected according to practice management software hit the bank? And that can be complicated because I was working with a DSO a little while ago. They had 20 different practice management softwares being used in their empire. They grew by acquisition, so they're buying practices, and their philosophy was, we're not going to change which software these folks use because A, it costs money, and B, it gets the staff upset when we come to them and say, great news, we have new software.
Right.
So they made the decision not to do that, but then they're running 20 different softwares. And the folks at head office who were trying to match this up just really didn't know any of the software very well. But the 2 questions are, first of all, did collections according to software line up with deposits? And secondly, is the software telling the truth? In other words, has somebody been making deceptive entries in practice management software so that it underreports the amount of money that patients have actually paid us? And I'm not going to get into details there either, but if a listener wants to have a conversation about that with me, I'm happy to do that one-on-one.
Okay. Awesome. You had just referenced when you work with some of these bigger entities who may have a director of finance, or a regional manager, or even an accounting department, for lack of a better term. So there's some built-in oversight. What about the emerging group practice, 2 to 3 dental practices, not enough revenue to really have a director of finance or their own accountant or even their own regional manager, but they have, say, an accountant that they work with and they have a good relationship with, or they have something along those lines. How much are you seeing or advising this outside entity to like dig in on a regular basis? Like, is it another set of checks and balances that you are recommending, or is that not a good idea? Or because I just don't want there to be the excuse of, well, this accountant that I've been working with, he's supposed to be watching this stuff and he's not, or what have you.
Yeah, you raise a great point, because there's a big disconnect between what dentists think their accountant is doing and what their accountant is typically actually doing. So most dental practices use what's called the cash method of accounting. And the cash method of accounting means that revenue is recognized when it hits your bank account. when that accounting is used, your accountant does not have any reason at all to look at what's going on in your practice management software. It is just not relevant for determining, according to their rules, how much money was made or how much tax you have to pay. Their process starts when money hits your bank account. So if revenue got diverted before that point, it's outside of the window that your accountant has to look into your practice. And I think the accounting profession, frankly, doesn't do a good enough job at saying to you, Jason, if money disappeared after that point, there's some chance we might find it. But whatever vanished before it hit your bank account in the first place is just outside of our purview. The accountants say that to you, but it's buried in a 4-page letter that they get you to sign every year. And it's not really highlighted enough. What I can tell you is this. When we look at all industries, so dentistry, but also everything else, the accounting profession finds about 40% of the employee theft that happens. When you narrow the focus to just dentistry, that number drops to about 9%.
Wow.
So if you think your accountant is kind of the front row of your defense against this, you're probably mistaken. Couple of things hold the accountants back. The first is, as I say, the cash method of accounting just doesn't require them to look at what happened in your practice management software. And I guess if you ask them to do it, it would probably cost extra. And the second problem you run into is that most accountants don't really understand the first thing about what happens in practice management software. So there's also kind of an expertise limitation there.
So it almost, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's almost a managing expectations with your relationship with your accountant. I'm sure there's some accountants, maybe dental specific ones, that would be open to having the capability of logging into your practice management software and pulling those reports. But more often than not, the dentist assumes for however way possible that that's happening. And then the accountant is saying, I don't even have login information to the software. How did you expect me to do, how would you expect me to do that? So just like everything in life, it's probably an expectations conversation. And then the accountant can ultimately say, we don't offer that service. Or yeah, we do offer that service. I wasn't aware that you wanted me to do that for you.
There is that disconnect. Exactly.
So I'm assuming that you get a lot of phone calls because maybe to your point that you just made, the accountant identifies something that raises a red flag, or maybe the doctor has finally started to do his homework that you've already unpacked and raises a red flag. Would you say, just throw out a number, would you say out of every 10 calls you get, is it from a reactive perspective or is it from a proactive perspective?
About 7 of those 10 calls are reactive. So I think I have a problem and can you please have a look?
Okay.
And of course, that's what we do. And when we investigate in a practice, the audience should hear that it's stealthy. In other words, the staff have no idea whatsoever that we're doing our work. And that's kind of important in terms of, if you're reacting to something that isn't embezzlement, but might be something else going on in your practice, you don't want to have made the declaration to your staff that you have trust issues.
100%. I hear what you're saying. From the 3 out of 10 that are trying to be a little bit more proactive, could you unpack, and I don't want you to give away your secret sauce or your IP, but could you unpack, what that typically looks like? And I would guess dissimilar to what you just said. I mean, again, if I were to reach out to you and say, David, I want you to proactively set me up for success, I would tell the staff, I would be like, hey, heads up. I'm bringing in an expert to proactively look at our situation. Or are you saying that's not what your recommendation would be?
You know your staff the best and what they're going to respond to and kind of the mindset you're trying to create with them. We set it up to be done stealthily, but we kind of leave you in the driver's seat as to what, if anything, you want to tell your staff. And a lot of the things that we recommend when we do proactive work are things that probably have other rationales beyond simply lowering embezzlement risk. I mean, one thing we do with a lot of practices, Jason, is we work on their pre-employment screening that they do before they hire people. Because I will tell you from painful experience that dentists do a terrible job of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information that's readily available that isn't routinely gathered before you hire somebody. And let me make this very direct. 70 million Americans, which is 1 in 4 adults in the United States, have criminal records.
Wow.
And the minority of dental practices do criminal record checks before they hire people. Just that simple. If you don't do criminal record checks, you're playing some level of Russian roulette, and sooner or later you're going to lose.
Wow. That's a number I didn't realize, but when you put it into that context, it's pretty alarming.
Now, not every one of those criminal records would stop me from hiring the applicant. But I certainly want to know about a criminal past, and I want to be able to put it into context, and I want to decide if it's a threat to me. So, if somebody has a criminal record because they got arrested 18 years ago in college for marijuana possession, that wouldn't bother me. On the other hand, if it was check fraud 2 years ago or child molestation, I mean, those things, for very different reasons are complete showstoppers to me.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So, a criminal record check isn't a binary thing. It's, let's see what is in their background that should concern me.
Well, let me ask you this, David. Before we hit record, you shared with me how long you've been doing this, and for our listeners who weren't privy to that part of the conversation, also shared with me that you actually love what you do and you want to do it for at least another 10 years or so. So my point is, you've seen a lot of stuff, right? What, 40 years you said? 89 you started?
30, yeah, it'll be 37 years this year.
So you've seen where the economy has been very bullish, and you've seen where the economy's been very bearish. You've lived through probably 2 to 3 documented recessions in that time. Um, all leading up to the question of, are you typically seeing an embezzlement rate go up as our population, our country goes into an economic downturn? And if so, is it 2x? Is it 3x? Like, so not to, yeah, man, I'm not Confucius, not, and I know you're not Nostradamus, but like it sounds like we're headed towards a recession. It sounds like things are maybe trending in a direction economically that are not ideal. It is what it is. It's a full cycle. Um, are you expecting to see embezzlement practices increase over the next 12 months?
Yeah, and there are kind of 2 cohorts who steal from dentists, and I call them needy and greedy. And needy thieves are stealing because there's a financial imbalance in their household. I mean, there's more money going out each month than what comes in, and they're just stealing to balance the books. So in a recession, a couple of things happen. First of all, the economy contracts and people lose their jobs. So, if you have 150 employees, chances are that some of them are going to have spouses who lose their jobs. Maybe things cost more. Groceries are trending upward right now, and if you're sort of living close to the wire and your food and energy costs go up by 10%, that puts you in that imbalance where you have negative cash flow each month. So that's the first group, and recessions definitely create more needy people, and some of those needy people will respond to that stimulus by stealing. You have a second cohort that I call greedy, and these people feel like society doesn't really reward them properly, so they're kind of ego driven, and you see more of those people when the economy is roaring along. The past 3 or 4 years, since we kind of shook COVID off, have been where those people come out.
Okay.
And what they see is they see their friends who own businesses or real estate or something getting ahead faster than they are. And that bothers them. And they steal to address it. So there's kind of a pro-cyclical group and a counter-cyclical group in what we deal with. And you see each of them at different times. It's interesting. Right after COVID, we were kind of seeing both at once. And that was a
Okay.
time, if you remember, when, there was this big displacement in the economy. And at the same time, there was all kinds of government stimulus money being dumped into the economy that created inflation. And we actually had both of those groups active at the same time. And I can only remember a couple of times in my career that that's happened.
Mm, that's super interesting to me. Um, I don't want to take up a ton more of your time, but I just have one final question from a proactive perspective, reaching out to you and your firm and stealth or non-stealth, stealthy to use your language. It sounds like a good proactive decision. I'm curious. Um, I see some of my team, no judgment, but they make anywhere from 20 to $25 an hour, and they're driving a brand new $80,000 truck, right? So, living paycheck to paycheck, and then all of a sudden something happens, so they fall into the needy category. Have you found that any of your clients can somehow avoid the risk of embezzlement or at least lower it through educating their teams on money management at home, budgeting, just how to basically maintain a budget, anything along those lines? Have that ever something that you've seen reap benefits?
I know some dentists who do that, and I think it's a great idea. I mean, totally aside from managing embezzlement risk, it's a holistic view of your employees. And it's saying, I value you as people, and I want you to succeed in life, and I'm going to do what I can to help. Um, those greedy thieves, the ones who steal from an ego deficit, I don't think that anything you're going to do along the lines of kind of financial counseling is going to help those folks. In fact, I think the opposite. It sort of makes them aware of how meager their resources are compared to you. Because what these people do is they compare themselves to you.
Right.
And they say, the only reason that Jason's successful is because I keep his chair full. And then when patients leave it, I get the money from him. And
Hmm.
really, he and I should be partners. And they forget a lot of stuff. I mean, they forget how much
Right.
time you spent in school and how much debt you came out with. And then, you took the biggest risk in your life when you bought a practice. I mean, none of that factors into their equation. I don't
Yeah.
think you're going to materially shift the thought process of those people.
Yeah.
I still think it's a good idea. And as I say, I think it's treating your staff like a whole person and not just, the assistant who passes me instruments all day. So
For sure.
from that perspective, I love the idea. And I think most staff would, if it was done right, would respond really positively to that kind of information. But I'm not sure it's going to materially affect your risks. There are a lot of other things you can do that will have a lot more impact.
Like what?
Well, first easy one, how duties are divided up in your practice. And I'm going to give you 3 simple rules for dividing up duties, because I'm sure you've heard a lot of people say to you over the years, okay, Jason, you need to make it so that nobody has sole control of money in your practice, but they don't necessarily give you a whole lot of specific guidance beyond that. I'm going to make it much more specific here. And I'm going to start by saying there are 6 tasks in the revenue cycle. And if anybody hasn't heard that term, what the revenue cycle is the series of things that have to happen to put money in your bank account. So the first thing that happens is treatment gets entered in your practice management software. Then patients and insurance companies get billed. Hopefully they pay. Then those payments get entered into your software. Then at the end of the day, there's an activity your staff do called balancing, and then money gets deposited. So those are the 6 things that happen. Treatment gets entered, patients and insurance companies get billed, they pay, the money gets entered into software, balancing at the end of the day, and then deposit. 3 rules. The first rule is the only people who should enter treatment are clinicians who are in the room when it happens. So in your operatory, it's typically your assistant who would be entering treatment into your software. If it's a hygiene operatory, it's probably the hygienist. But the idea of front desk staff taking your clinical notes or some kind of routing slip and from that making entries in software, really bad idea. That was kind of the way it was done in 1998 when, there was one computer terminal in the whole practice and that person operated it and that was the only way to get information in. But if you're still doing that, stop. And you or your assistant or hygienist, if we're talking a hygiene operatory, should be the only people ever entering treatment. You've got 5 tasks left. And my rule for those is very simple. Nobody should do more than 2 of them. And the 2 tasks that somebody does should not be sequential. So whoever's doing balancing at the end of the day should not be the same person doing the bank deposit. The person who receives payments should not be the person who enters them into practice management software.
Oh.
And if you have a big practice and you have, 5 front desk employees, this isn't all that hard. If you are a 1 dentist, 1 hygienist, 1 assistant, 1 receptionist practice, now you got to get a little creative. And some easy stuff to do. For example, one of your assistant's responsibilities could be doing the day end balancing. An easy doctor task is get the mail. And I'm not talking the mail comes into the front desk and then somebody puts it on your desk. I'm saying you have to be the first person who has control of the mail. So that means typically a post office box that you have the key to, and on the way to work,
incoming chat.
On the way to work, in a quest to write off your car expenses, you pick up the mail.
That's a great strategy and one that I've never heard of. So that right there is going to be worth the price of admission. David, this conversation for me has been really, really awesome. Packed full of wisdom and little nuggets. I mean, when you started when we started the recording, just the articulation concept is like, okay, yeah, I can't wait to start doing that tomorrow. So I'm sure our listeners will have more questions. Maybe they want to get stealthy. Maybe they want to just pick your brain. What is the best way for them to reach out to you and touch base?
Absolutely. The easiest thing to do is go on our website. There's a menu item called Contact Us. When you click that, there's a little form that shows up. Just fill it in, and we'll get back to you very quickly with a booking link to say, here's a link, pick a time that works for you, and we can have a chat. And I'm happy to talk to any of your audience with no fee, no obligation. Let's just understand what you see as the issues you face, and we'll see if we have something that will help.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm sure you do a lot of good. I'm sure you do a lot of good for a lot of people, and hopefully we can carry on that tradition with a bunch of our Dental Lighthouse listeners. So again, thank you so much for the time. So appreciate the wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Harris.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tanoory, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.